In the middle of the 14th century, Europe was a world of stone walls, crowded markets, and constant movement. Merchant caravans crossed deserts, ships stitched together distant ports, and narrow streets overflowed with craftsmen, priests, and farmers who had never traveled far from home. Life was harsh but familiar, guided by faith, tradition, and the slow rhythm of the seasons. Yet beyond the horizon, carried silently along the trade routes that connected continents, an invisible enemy was already on its way. It had no banners, no armies, and no warning. When it arrived, it would kill faster than any war in memory and change the course of history forever. The world would come to know it as the Black Death. The disease was caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, a microscopic organism that lived naturally among wild rodents in the grasslands of Central Asia. For centuries, it remained confined to animal hosts, flaring up and dying down in remote regions. But the 14th century was an age of connection. The vast Mongol Empire had opened trade across Eurasia, linking China, the Middle East, and Europe through the Silk Road. Caravans carried silk, spices, silver, and grain across thousands of miles. Hidden in sacks of food and the fur of rats, infected fleas traveled with them. Step by step, mile by mile, the plague moved west. By the 1340s, it reached the trading outposts around the Black Sea. One of the most famous accounts comes from the port city of Kaffa, where merchants from Italy operated a busy colony. During a siege, disease spread through the attacking army. Contemporary reports claim that corpses were hurled over the walls, possibly spreading infection inside. Whether by siege or simple trade, ships soon fled the region, sailing toward the Mediterranean. They carried more than frightened sailors. In their holds, rats nested among the cargo, fleas fed and multiplied. The plague had found its passage into Europe. In 1347, ships began docking in Sicily and southern Italy, with crews already sick or dead. Witnesses described vessels drifting into harbor with no one left alive to steer them. When townspeople boarded to investigate, they exposed themselves to the same fate. Within days, the symptoms appeared. Fever burned through the body. Headaches and chills left victims trembling. Painful swellings, called buboes, rose in the armpits, neck, and groin as the infection spread through the lymph nodes. Dark bruises formed beneath the skin, giving the disease its haunting name. Many who fell ill were dead within 3 or 4 days. From these first ports, the plague spread with terrifying speed. Medieval Europe was a web of roads, rivers, and markets. Traders moved constantly from town to town. Pilgrims journeyed to holy sites. Soldiers marched between kingdoms. Everywhere people went, the disease followed. By 1348, it had reached Florence, Paris, and Barcelona. By 1349, it was in London and the cities of Germany. By 1350, it touched Scandinavia and Eastern Europe. No walls were high enough, no distance far enough. The plague traveled faster than news of its coming. Cities were hit first and hardest. Streets that had once been noisy with vendors and children fell silent. Doors were marked with signs of sickness. Carts creaked through the alleys to collect bodies. Church bells rang so often for funerals that their sound blended into the air like a constant echo of grief. In many places, the number of dead was so overwhelming that normal burial rites became impossible. Mass graves were dug outside city walls. Bodies were stacked in layers, covered quickly with soil, and forgotten in the rush to bury the next wave. Contemporary writers tried to capture the horror, but words often failed them. The Italian author Giovanni Boccaccio described families abandoning their own relatives out of fear. Some locked themselves inside their homes, hoping isolation would save them. Others fled to the countryside, only to carry the disease with them. Trust collapsed. Neighbors avoided one another. Parents feared their children. The simple act of touch became dangerous. Society, built on community and shared life, began to fracture under the pressure of survival. Doctors were powerless. Medieval medicine relied on ancient theories about imbalanced humors and poisoned air. Physicians prescribed bloodletting, herbal mixtures, and strange remedies that did nothing to stop the infection. Some wore long robes and masks shaped like beaks, stuffed with flowers and spices to block what they believed were toxic vapors. These figures, half doctor and half omen, wandered through dying cities offering little more than comfort. The true cause, bacteria carried by fleas, remained unknown for centuries. Fear demanded explanation, and in the absence of science, people turned to faith and rumor. Many believed the plague was divine punishment for human sin. Churches filled with prayers and desperate confessions. Groups of flagellants marched from town to town, whipping themselves in public displays of repentance, hoping to appease God. Others searched for someone to blame. Foreigners, beggars, and especially Jewish communities were falsely accused of poisoning wells. Violence followed. Entire neighborhoods were attacked or expelled. In their panic, people added cruelty to tragedy. The scale of death was unlike anything Europe had ever experienced. Modern historians estimate that between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population died between 1347 and 1351. That meant at least 25 million lives lost, and perhaps far more. Across the Middle East and North Africa, millions more perished. In some villages, every inhabitant died. Fields went unharvested, livestock wandered untended. Whole communities simply vanished from the map, leaving only empty houses and overgrown paths to show they had ever existed. Yet, even as the plague destroyed, it began quietly reshaping the world of the living. For centuries, most Europeans had lived under feudalism. Peasants worked the land for powerful lords, bound by obligation and tradition. Labor was plentiful, and workers had little choice or freedom. But after the plague, everything changed. With so many dead, there were not enough hands to plow fields or build houses. Survivors suddenly found themselves in demand. Wages rose. Landlords competed for workers. Peasants could bargain, move, or refuse unfair treatment. The balance of power began to shift. In England and parts of France, laws were passed to freeze wages and tie workers to their land, but these efforts often failed. People continued to move toward towns where opportunities were greater. A new middle class of artisans and merchants grew stronger. Over time, the rigid structure of feudal society weakened. Historians now see the Black Death as one of the forces that helped end the medieval order and prepare the way for a more modern economy. Religion, too, was transformed. The church had long been the center of life, offering answers and stability. But during the plague, many priests died alongside their congregations. Prayers seemed unanswered. Some believers lost faith, questioning why God would allow such suffering. Others searched for new spiritual paths. This crisis of confidence slowly eroded the church's unquestioned authority and opened the door to fresh ideas. In the centuries that followed, the Renaissance and the Reformation would challenge old traditions and reshape European thought. There were practical changes as well. With fewer people to feed, food became more available. Survivors often enjoyed better diets and higher living standards. Land, once divided among many families, was consolidated. Innovation increased as communities sought ways to do more with fewer workers. Tools improved. Trade expanded. Cities reorganized themselves. From the ashes of disaster, new possibilities emerged. The plague did not disappear after its first outbreak. It returned again and again in waves over the next 300 years. London, Paris, and Venice all suffered repeated epidemics. But with each return, people learned. Cities introduced quarantine systems, forcing ships to wait offshore before docking. Travelers were monitored. Early public health boards formed to track disease. These measures, simple by modern standards, marked the beginnings of organized disease control. Hard experience was slowly turning fear into knowledge. Eventually, changes in sanitation, housing, and rat populations reduced the scale of outbreaks in Europe. By the 17th century, the worst of the plague had passed. Today, the same bacterium still exists, but antibiotics can treat it effectively. What once killed millions can now often be cured in days. The terror that haunted medieval streets has become a manageable illness. But the memory remains. The Black Death was not just a medical crisis, it was a turning point that altered demography, economics, religion, and culture. It exposed the fragility of human society and the limits of human understanding. At the same time, it revealed resilience, the ability of survivors to rebuild, adapt, and create something new from loss. When we look at the modern world, we can still see its shadow. The rise of cities, the decline of feudalism, the beginnings of public health, and the questioning of old authorities all trace part of their origins to those terrible years. The plague carved a deep scar across history, but from that scar grew transformation. In the end, the Black Death reminds us that history is not shaped only by kings and wars, but also by forces too small to see. A single bacterium carried by a flea on a rat aboard a ship changed the destiny of continents. It silenced millions of voices, yet it also helped create the world that followed. And in the quiet spaces where villages once stood, and in the chronicles written by those who survived, the echo of that great mortality still whispers, a warning, a lesson, and a testament to the fragile, enduring story of humanity.